Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we're going to be looking at Week 11 of the NFL schedule and predicting our winners and losers of every game and going into our top 10 power rankings right after. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Starting off the week on Thursday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Commanders and Eagles. The Commanders, they're coming off a rough loss where they only lost by 1 point and it was a real heartbreaker. They were winning most of that game, and then the Steelers were able to come back right at the end and win 28-27. They played a really good game on offense. Their rushing attack was great. Jaden Daniels was efficient, and while he didn't score any touchdowns, he played pretty well. And their passing game, Terry McLaurin looked really good, and they were getting the ball and scoring points. So they played pretty well. The Eagles, on the other hand, they had a dominant win over the Cowboys in a game where their defense and offense both performed really well. They only let up 6 points as they won 34-6. They had 4 fumble recoveries and an interception, so they had a really good showing. These games, especially being divisional matchups, but especially between these two teams, tend to be really close, and both of these teams are pretty good, so I'm really unsure with who to choose in this game. I do think the Commanders have a slight edge, but I'm actually going to go with the Eagles. I think the Commanders have been a better team, but the Eagles have been hot recently, and I think that is going to mean a lot going into this game. The Eagles were just really dominant, and I think that might be enough for them to take down the Commanders. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Browns and the Saints. The Browns, they're coming off a bye. They've been playing very badly this season with only 2 wins on the season. Their offense really hasn't been able to perform, and while their defense is pretty decent, it's not enough to carry that offense. Jameis Winston has been an improvement, though, since Deshaun Watson went down with an injury, and Nick Chubb being back also should give this team a little bit of hope on offense. The Saints, on the other hand, they're coming off a win, a divisional win, over the Falcons in a game where their offense looked really good. Derek Carr played great. Marquez Valdes-Scantling in his second game with the team had 2 touchdowns on 2 really big catches, and their rushing attack looked good with Alvin Kamara. Their defense played well as they were able to hold. While Bijan ran all over them, Kirk Cousins did not have that great of a game. So it was a pretty decent showing from their defense. That all being said, I do think the Saints are going to struggle against the Browns' defense, as the Browns' defense is pretty decent, and the Saints don't really have weapons. So I am going to choose the Browns to win this one, as I think their defense will be more than the Saints can handle. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Colts and the Jets. The Colts, they're coming off a loss to the Bills in a game where they lost 30-20. Joe Flacco threw multiple interceptions, including a pick 6 on his first throw. Their offense really wasn't performing that well, but it improved throughout the game. Jonathan Taylor had a really efficient day, and all of their receivers played pretty well in that game. The Jets, on the other hand, they are coming off a loss where they got dominated by the Cardinals 6-31. The Cardinals ran all over them. They passed all over them. Kyler Murray had a really efficient game against them. The Jets' defense couldn't stop anything, and their offense couldn't do anything. The Jets are not a very good team. The Colts are a decent team, especially when they play against bad teams. So I am going to pick the Colts to win this one. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Vikings and the Titans. This matchup, the Vikings, they're coming off a win over the Jaguars in a really ugly game where they won 12-7. They didn't really score any touchdowns. Sam Darnold played pretty bad. He had multiple interceptions, and while their defense played pretty well, it was against a backup quarterback and a really bad Jaguars offense. And that offense of the Vikings played really poorly against the Jaguars defense, which is not good at all. The Titans, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Chargers, 17-27, in a game where Will Levis looked all right, Calvin Ridley looked great, and the defense really couldn't stop that much. Their defense has been pretty good all season, and in this game they were getting gashed by the Chargers. I am going to pick the Vikings. I think their defense is pretty good, and I think they're a much better team than the Titans are. However, I do think the Titans could be a thorn in the Vikings' sides, as the Vikings have been struggling as of recently, but I do think this will be a bounce-back game for them. Moving on, we've got a divisional matchup between the Bears and the Packers. The Bears, they're coming off a really rough loss to the Patriots in a game where they lost 3-19. Their offense couldn't do anything the entire game. Caleb Williams looked bad. The passing game looked bad. The running game looked bad. And their defense, they looked pretty decent, but it was against the Patriots, who do not have a good offense. The Bears have been struggling as of the past few weeks heavily, and their coaching is just terrible. They really need help on offense with coaching, and so I really don't have a lot of faith in them on offense. The Packers, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye. They've been playing really well on offense. Jordan Love, while they did lose to the Lions in the game before the bye, before that they had been really good, and Jordan Love had been playing well, and the defense is leading the league, I believe, in takeaways. And typically in this rivalry, the Packers have had the Bears' number almost always, especially in recent history. And I do think that's going to be the same here. I'm going to pick the Packers to win. They've been a much better team than the Bears have been this season. And while the Bears have had some ups and downs, recently it's been a lot more down than up. And therefore, I don't think they're going to win this game. The Packers win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Jaguars and the Lions. The Lions, they're coming off a comeback victory over the Houston Texans on Sunday Night Football in a game where they did not play well. Jared Goff had 5 interceptions. They couldn't really do a whole lot on offense in the first half. Their run game looked bad. Their pass game looked bad. But they really rebounded in the second half. They scored some touchdowns on offense. Their run game really picked up the pace. And their defense really picked it up as well, as they were able to score 19 unanswered points in that game. The Jaguars, on the other hand, they had a really rough game against the Vikings, where their defense actually played really well. They held the Vikings to only 12 points, but their offense with Mac Jones, since Trevor Lawrence was hurt, couldn't do anything, as they only scored 1 touchdown in the entire game. The Jaguars are not a good team, and the Lions are one of the best teams in the league, so I do think this is a pretty easy one. Lions win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Ravens and the Steelers, and this is another divisional matchup. The Steelers, they're coming off a win over the Commanders, who are a really good team, but they won by 1 point. Their offense was really performing, and they struggled at first, but they really picked up the pace. Najee Harris struggled at first especially, but really picked it up, and Russell Wilson played a pretty good game, as well as that defense playing really well towards the end of that game. The Ravens, they are coming off a stunning win on Thursday Night Football over the Bengals in a really close game, 34-35, where their defense was getting gashed by Jamar Chase, who had 260 yards and 2 touchdowns. But their offense was really performing. Lamar Jackson had an amazing game, and their offense could not be stopped. And while their defense really was playing poorly the whole game, they came up big when it mattered on the 2-point conversion that lost the Bengals the game that they did not convert. The Ravens are a really good team, so are the Steelers, and this is a really tough matchup because it is a divisional matchup between 2 really good teams. The Steelers have typically been able to take down the Ravens in these matchups lately, and the Steelers play really well against their divisional opponents, so I'm going to go with the Steelers, but I really would not be surprised either turnout of this game. If the Ravens win or the Steelers win, I think this will be a really close game. I think this will be a really good game, but I'm going to pick the Steelers to win. Moving on, we've got another divisional matchup, this one between the Seahawks and the 49ers. The Seahawks, they are coming off a bye. They've been struggling as of late, as they started the season 3-0 and are now 4-5. 2 weeks ago, they lost to the Rams in a game that they brought to overtime. Their offense was struggling, as Geno Smith, he has led the league in passing yards. However, he also has the most interceptions in the league, and so that offense has been really shaky. The 49ers, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a game where Christian McCaffrey came back and played pretty well. Brock Purdy had a great game, and Juwan Jennings really stepped up in the receiving game, as well as Ricky Pearsall and Deebo Samuel and George Kittle playing pretty good roles as well. However, that defense really struggled towards the end of the game, and their special teams also really struggled as Jake Moody missed 3 field goals, but he did hit the game-winning field goal right at the end, which is the one kick that ended up mattering the most, as they still ended up winning that game. The 49ers, they've been up and down a lot this season. Haven't been the same team that they've been in years past. However, I do still think that they are a better team than the Seahawks. And while I do think this will be a close game, as it is a divisional game between two teams that are pretty similar in skill level as of this season, I do still think the 49ers will come away with a victory. Up next, we've got a matchup between the Falcons and the Broncos. The Falcons, they're coming off a divisional loss to the Saints in a game where they lost to a team that is not good. The Saints are not a good team, and they lost. It was really close. Bijan Robinson had an amazing game. Their defense really just kept getting gashed by Derek Carr and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who was only in his second game with the Saints. It was a really disappointing performance from the Falcons defense, who haven't been very great this season, but they haven't been bad either. The Broncos, on the other hand, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Chiefs in a game where they had the chance to win with a game-winning field goal, 35-yarder, right as time expired, and it got blocked, and they lost the game by 2 points. It was a really heartbreaking game. Their offense was performing well in the first half, and then got shut out completely in the second half. Their defense was performing well in the first half and then started letting up points in the second half, and it was just a really disappointing second half to their game against their division rival Chiefs. The Broncos are still a pretty decent team, and so are the Falcons. They just both had rough losses to divisional opponents. I do think this will be a pretty close game, as both teams are pretty similar in skill level, and both teams have been up and down this season, with some pretty big victories and some pretty brutal losses. That being said, I do think that the Falcons will win this game. The Falcons have been better than the Broncos on offense, and while their defense hasn't been as good as the Broncos, I do think their offense will be too much for the Broncos' defense to handle. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Chiefs and the Bills, and this game is always an awesome game between Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. The Bills, they're coming off a win over the Colts in a game where Josh Allen threw another interception, but it was only his second of the entire season. Their offense was really performing. They scored 30 points. Their defense was forcing turnovers, and they had a really good game. The Chiefs, they struggled throughout that game as they almost lost to the Broncos, but their special teams came up clutch right at the end and was able to block a field goal to prevent the Broncos from taking over and winning that game right as time expired. The Chiefs are still undefeated. I think this could be and is the most likely case to be their first loss. However, it is really hard to choose against the Chiefs right now, as they are still undefeated up to this point in the season at 9-0, which is really impressive. I'm really conflicted on who to pick, because the Chiefs typically win these matchups when it matters most. However, the Bills have been winning these matchups lately in the regular season. So I am really conflicted, because you could consider this to matter the most, as the Chiefs are still trying to hold up their perfect season and win every single game. However, the Bills, they've been winning games against the Chiefs in the regular season recently. So I'm pretty conflicted, but I'm going to choose the Bills to win this game. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Dolphins and the Raiders. The Dolphins, they're coming off a Monday Night Football win over the Rams in a game where they actually looked pretty good. Their defense was able to hold the Rams to only field goals. Their offense was able to perform. Tyreek Hill didn't look great, but Jalen Waddle looked really good. Tua looked iffy, and the run game did look really good. Devon Achane looked great. Raheem Mostert looked great. They both also looked great in the passing game. But it was really that defense that looked great for them to get that win. The Raiders, on the other hand, they're coming off a bye week, very much needed, because they are not a good football team. Their offense really just can't perform, and their defense isn't anything special either. The Raiders are not a good team, and the Dolphins aren't a great team, but they're still better than the Raiders, so I am going to pick the Dolphins to win this game. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the Rams and the Patriots. The Rams, they're coming off a loss on Monday Night Football to the Dolphins in a game where they didn't score any touchdowns. They had 5 field goals, though, and their kicker looked great, but the rest of their offense really wasn't performing that well. Matthew Stafford, again, no touchdowns. Puka Nacua had a great game. Cooper Kupp had a few big catches, but that was about it. And the run game was okay. It wasn't too great, though. The Patriots, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Chicago Bears in a game where they won 19-3. Drake May looked pretty good. Their defense looked amazing. They had 9 sacks. And the Patriots aren't a good team, but they looked pretty good in that game. The Rams are a better team than the Patriots. The Patriots are on a hot streak as of recent. However, I am going to pick the Rams because I think they're a better football team. I think they're better on offense. I don't think the Patriots defense is going to be able to stop the Rams offense, and therefore I think the Rams will get the win. Moving on to Sunday Night Football, we've got a matchup between the Bengals and the Chargers. And this is an exciting one because it has a lot of AFC playoff implications. The Bengals, they're coming off a loss to the Ravens in a 1-point game where they went for 2 and did not get it and ended up losing the game. They played amazing on offense, but their defense continues to struggle all season. Ja'Marr Chase had an unbelievable game with over 260 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Joe Burrow played really well as well. And that run game with Chase Brown and the pass game with Chase Brown also looked really good. The Chargers, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Titans in a game where they went 27-7. Their defense looked pretty good for most of the game. However, they did let up 1 big touchdown to Calvin Ridley early, and they did let up 1 touchdown to Calvin Ridley in garbage time. But besides that, and especially considering that was garbage time, their defense did play pretty well. And their offense scored a lot of points. They got 27. Justin Herbert continues to play efficient football, and the run game looks really good under Jim Harbaugh and J.K. Dobbins. So they're a pretty good team. I think this will be a really close matchup. It'll be really interesting to see Joe Burrow take on Justin Herbert. But I'm really conflicted on this matchup as I think the Bengals offense is better than the Chargers, but I think the Chargers are a more well-rounded team because the Chargers defense is pretty good and the Bengals is not. That being said, though, the Bengals have kept up with some really good opponents lately, like the Ravens, and I think they're bound for a win, so I'm going to pick the Bengals to win this one. And our final game is a Texas showdown between the Texans and the Cowboys on Monday Night Football. Dak is out for a season, so the Cowboys season is pretty much over as is, but the Cowboys, they got destroyed by the Eagles 34-6 in a game where their offense looked bad, their defense looked bad. They really couldn't get anything going on either side of the ball, and they let up a ton of points to the Eagles, whose defense played unbelievable against the Cowboys' offense, who was really struggling. The Texans, on the other hand, they're coming off a heartbreaking loss to the Lions in a game where they realistically should have won. They had 5 takeaways because Jared Goff threw 5 interceptions, and they still ended up losing that game. They let up 19 unanswered points and went from being up 23-7 to losing 23-26. It was a really disappointing game for them, but they did look way better than the Lions in that first half. So that at least is one positive, and they're still a good team. They're significantly better than the Cowboys, and I don't think this will be that close of a game, so I'm going to pick the Texans to win. But Texans seeming to be the better team in Texas. Looking over at our top 10 list for the week, starting off at number 10, I've got the Vikings. This was their roughest week of the season that didn't result in a loss as they played terrible on offense. Their defense played pretty well, but it was against a backup quarterback. And the flaws of this team are starting to show. They've still got a good record. Their defense is still really good, but the offense has some problems. Sam Darnold is a little inconsistent. And yeah, they're at number 10. And number 9, I've got the Chargers. They've been playing really well on both offense and defense. That being said, it was a little bit of a closer game with the final score being only 10 points over the Titans. They didn't blow them out. They haven't been blowing teams out. But they're winning games where it matters, and they're playing good football. They've got a good run game, and their defense is pretty good. So they're in number 9. At 8, I've got the Packers. They've had some injuries with Jordan Love. They've had some inconsistencies with Jordan Love as well, who's been throwing a lot of interceptions this season. But they're scoring a lot of points. Their defense has the most takeaways, and they're coming off a bye. So for that reason, they're in at number 8. At 7, I've got the Commanders. They just recently barely lost to the Steelers, and they're still a really good team. They've been able to take down some other really good teams. Their offense has been amazing under a rookie quarterback. Their defense has really stepped up over this course of the season and has just improved throughout the entirety of the season. And for those reasons, they're in at number 7. At 6, I've got the Steelers. They just took down the Commanders and I think are very slightly better than them. Russell Wilson has been an even bigger boost to that offense than Justin Fields was over Kenny Pickett in the offseason. And so now Russell Wilson at the helm, they're doing even better. George Pickens is playing amazing. Mike Williams got the game-winning touchdown in his first game with the team. Najee Harris is holding down the run game, and they're playing pretty well on the run game. And their defense continues to be one of the best units in the entire league. So for those reasons, they're in at number 6. At 5, I've got the Eagles. They've just been improving as the season goes on. They have been amazing on offense. Their defense played incredible against the Cowboys, had 4 fumble recoveries and 4 forced fumbles, and just all around really good, well-rounded performance by the Eagles. Saquon's great. Jalen Hurts is playing great. He has a ton of touchdowns on the season, towards the top of all quarterbacks in total touchdowns. And their receiving weapons obviously are really good. And their defense has just been improving continuously as the season goes on. Number 4, I've got the Ravens. They've got one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the league, with Lamar Jackson having 24 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, and an amazing run game behind Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. And they're getting pieces back, too, like Keaton Mitchell for that backfield, who, while he won't start, he very much could add another element to that backfield with his speed. And their defense is really the only thing that's holding them back, as their defense led up over 260 yards to Jamar Chase and 3 touchdowns to him. And their defense really can't stop the pass very well. It's definitely been a big problem this season, and I'm not really sure why, but it's holding them back. At number 3, I've got the Bills. They've got an unbelievable offense and defense. They keep winning games. Josh Allen's playing really efficient and not really turning the ball over very much. And they are scoring points without their top receivers, who have been injured one by one, week to week. But they should be all back by next week. And with them all coming back, that offense should be even better than it has been. And the defense should continue to thrive, although they play the Chiefs. At number 2, I've got the Lions. They did drop a spot, and that's because Jared Goff threw 5 interceptions, and they showed that they are mortal, but they still came away with a win. And good teams come away with wins whenever possible. And in this case, they are a good team, and they came away with a win in a really odd situation. But they were able to come away with a win, and props to them. They're in at number 2. And in at number 1 is the Chiefs. They are still undefeated. They haven't been playing their best football. It's been inconsistent. They've had a lot of flaws. Mahomes isn't playing incredible, but they're winning games. And their coaching is unbelievable, and they're finding ways to win games no matter what. And their defense and special teams are unbelievable. Their special teams came in clutch and was able to block the game-winning field goal and end up winning that game, keeping them at 9-0 and undefeated. And this season could end up being an undefeated season for the Chiefs and the three-peat. Let's hope it isn't, but it's possible still. Anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And follow me on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, I'll tune in with you guys next time. Peace.